It's time for us to get love right, folks. And so we invite you to check out the King and Queen of Hearts.
This is an incredible training for couples who are struggling in unsatisfying sex lives.
It's also for lifelong learners, people whose relationship is great and they want to make it even better.
In this 3-part training that is filled with 8 different tutorials like the art of tantric kissing, eye gazing that is deep and intimate, connective, and not creepy, and sacred sexual meditations, you do them with your lover to juice you up before sex. Communication tips and really, really valuable relationship essentials are all found in this training.
You know, a common mistake couples make is they wait, they put it off, they avoid, they resist. And if you want to continue doing that, well, good luck. But if you really want to make a change, get this today. Don't let another month go by where you're losing precious connection with your partner.
Plus, you can't beat the price on this program. One of our clients, Casey, said a spark in their intimacy is back on track.
Now, Sarah and her husband, you know what she told us, Willow? She said, finally, he learned how to kiss her right.
Oh my God, hallelujah. So happy for Sarah.
So if you want some radical changes in your love life, go to sexreimagine.com, click on courses, and scroll until you find the King and Queen of Hearts. And because you are a fan of the podcast, you can use the King and Queen 10 code in order to get 10% off. That is King and Queen 10, and you can use it in the checkout. Well, hey, friends, welcome back to the Sex Reimagined podcast. If you are new here, we are tickled to have you. Please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts on this episode. My name is Leah Piper. I am the co-host of this podcast, and I'm with Dr. Willow Brown.
And today we have Patrick Eilers, a seasoned professional in the field of clinical counseling psychology with a master's degree in psychology and a graduate certificate from the Moody Theological Seminary of Michigan. He brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to our discussion, specializing in sexuality and porn addiction. And Patrick shares insights from his career in counseling people who've been addicted to porn and offering some really valuable advice on overcoming these challenges. So really rich interview, really great to sit with Patrick, and you all are going to love him.
Hey, you guys, you know how much I love a Mischke. We got a Michigander on the show today, and we really do pour into this complex thing called porn addiction that so many people struggle with, especially young people. So please tune in, turn on, and fall in love with Patrick, another Michigander.
Welcome to the Sex Reimagined podcast, where sex is shame-free and pleasure-forward. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to the show, everyone. We've got Patrick in the studio, and we are going to dive right in to the impact of porn addiction, both in the relationship for the person who is addicted to porn and also for the partner, if there is a partner, and the impact on them and some of the things that they need to manage therapeutically.
Yeah, we've got an expert in the house. We're so glad that you're here, Patrick, to just share with us what you've seen clinically in regarding men who've been stuck on porn since maybe even before puberty, since they were maybe 8 or 9 years old, and the effects that has on not only their relationship to their own sexuality, but intimate relationships later on in life. So
wait. Just a minute here, folks. 8-year-olds are getting addicted to porn. This is the first time I'm hearing of that. Patrick, help. What's going on?
Well, it certainly can be an early age, and certainly, sometimes can be younger than that too, depending on if it's, when their exposure is. And, we know that kids start, 5, 6 years old are, having devices and have access to things that, parents don't have any clue about. So it really depends upon kind of, what their story is, and everybody's story is individual. So we have a lot of different experiences for folks. There's really kind of no like one size fits all sort of story. Everybody's story has their own narrative. So it is important to think about when and for each individual story, when they start to have those experiences, but they can be in that early age range for sure, 5 to 10 years old.
Well, welcome to technology.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Even before technology, I feel like when I was maybe in my early 20s, I was hearing the statistic around like that kids are getting into drugs and sex at around 9 years old. And that was before like this massive blow up of everyone has their own little handheld computer in their back
I have
pocket.
never heard of it being 8 and 9 years old. I heard of it being like 6th graders, which in my coming of age, it was more like 8th and 9th graders. But we're talking 5th graders and 4th graders. I mean, you're like, how old are you when you're 10? What, you're in like 4th and 5th grade? I'm just a little
Miffed.
stunned. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it depends too.
It is
Because I
shocking.
think there's a lot of that experience. Like, when you start, what do you find on, a lot of times it's people's friends, people know about different things from different places. Sometimes it's just that they Google search things. And so if your devices are not, having some type of monitoring software on them, typically it's very common for people to start having those experiences where they start to have exposures to it. They may not be addicted to it or seeking it out all the time, but they are certainly having exposure to it. And that does tend to sort of trend to the direction of, when do you start to become obsessed over it or thinking about it to the point that it's, unhealthy. So there certainly is an aspect of that where, do we call it diagnosable addiction at 8, 9 years old? Probably not, but certainly the aspect of people having those early exposures are a big, big part of what starts that process.
And, in the studies that I've read, Patrick, my understanding, I believe it was 2008 or 2010 when the internet really started to go big with porn. And so what we've seen is like 50% rise in porn addiction. I think it was 2008, maybe it was 2005 actually. And that it's really the video porn that has skyrocketed this being an issue, and especially in ages younger than 40, we're seeing the rise of erectile dysfunction as a correlation to porn addiction. Does that line up with the things that you've studied?
For sure, yeah. As far as the study goes, I mean, one of the more recent studies I found was one from Mayo Clinic. I think it was 2019, so it's a little more recent than some of the ones you're mentioning. But as far as they're estimating between 6 to 8%, 24 million people, at least in the United States anyway, as far as being maybe what we consider in the range of where sex addiction would exist for them. And again, video porn is a big part of that. So I think there's certainly been an increase for that since 2005, really since the internet has been around, certainly moving from, sort of digital photography to more like a video, moving into more as we're trending toward virtual reality, metaverse. You're talking about, moving toward robots and those kind of things. So we're not really sure totally. And I tell people all the time, the idea that we haven't really had a full generation from birth to death have the internet entirely in their life. We've had people who've been born with the internet, but not people who've gone through an entire generation.
Oh, interesting.
So we really don't know the outcome of a lot of these things. We're kind of in the midst of the storm and we still have ways to go. So we don't really know what the outcome totally is going to be at the end because we don't really know what the result is. We haven't lived that yet. So we're in that position where, I think it's still moving and still trending. It's stuff that we haven't really landed, so to speak, at like the worst, if you'd say. It's probably continuing to trend in an upward direction to affect people in that way.
And what's the percentage between men and women who you're seeing with porn addiction?
So for me, I mean, I have mostly men, mainly because I'm a guy. So a lot, mostly work with men because men are comfortable working. But I know we have in our practice, our practice really specializes in sexual addiction. And the other side of it is the partner trauma, which is really how the partners end up getting impacted by addiction, by porn addiction, by infidelity, those kind of things. For me, I'd say 95+% of it are guys right now. I don't really have any women on my caseload, but that doesn't necessarily mean that women are not affected by this. It's just women probably are more comfortable talking to women about it. So I know a couple of my colleagues do have some people that they work with that are female that are definitely dealing with this part of it too.
Yeah, there's certainly plenty of women are addicted to it as well. I mean, it's what's so interesting about it is that it's not the actual porn they're addicted to. They're addicted to the chemicals the response inside of their own body that they get from watching it. So, and we all are addicted to dopamine and oxytocin. Like we all want that like hit of those, endorphins in our bodies. And so when we get that from a certain, from pornography, then yeah, we want to keep watching it. I'm so curious, like, when clients come to you, because I created this whole beautiful program for porn addiction from a Chinese medicine perspective, like how to overcome addictions, amino acids to feed your brain chemistry with to really stop those addictions, because you can overcome addiction to anything, sugar, sex, whatever, with amino acid therapy. It's pretty powerful. And it's been hard to market because people aren't raising their hand and saying, "Oh, I have a porn addiction." We actually looked it up on Google, like, what's the actual population that we could even market this to? And
that
it's
people are like
pretty low.
searching like porn
Yeah.
addiction. Yeah. Like,
Yes,
what are the
exactly.
keywords for people who are looking for help? Are people
Ye-
looking for help?
Yeah, so I'm just curious, like, when people come to you, what are they saying when they first arrive on your doorstep?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two big parts to it. The first part is certainly that a partner usually is a main motivator why people will seek out recovery or seek out some type of therapy, typically. Meaning the relationship, sometimes it's immediate discovery, but usually it's a long period of time, meaning that they could have had 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever it might be, where it's just been continuous and the partner's like, look, this either stops or I'm not going to continue this relationship. And so we do see a lot of people in kind of that desperation, chaos of, hey, I have to address this now and this has to go away or whatever the case may be. And it's very common for people to kind of go for that one side of it. They want to just stop behavior. They really don't want to do any of their beyond work, which is kind of the secondary part, which is more of, you got to make a lifestyle change. You want to do something different. You got to make some changes. You can't just stop the one part of the behaviors. We see a lot of people focusing on that first part, and that's why they haven't had success over a period of time, because they're not really doing anything different. They're just trying to avoid it. And the more we try to avoid something, the more we're thinking about it, the more likely we're going to keep doing it. So what ends up happening is this avoidance factor actually becomes more of a draw for, draws people into continuing the behavior than trying to get away from it. And we just can't escape it in the culture. So that's just something we have to be aware of. I think the other thing kind of brings people in is how actually it does escalate for folks. Some people, it will escalate to the point that their life is affected. They can't go to work because they're not sleeping. They can't function to their normal things that they like to do. There is a spiritual, cultural piece to that, depending if you're if you're a Christian, or has some type of sort of religious background that way. Yeah, faith-based background, you're certainly going to probably more motivated to stop this behavior than maybe somebody who might not be. So there are some things like that come up, but for the most part, it's usually drawn in by a partner or by some circumstance like that or around that, either a loss of a relationship, something like that. Typically, is what usually brings people in as far as recognizing, hey, I can't stop this, and I don't know what to do about that.
So what makes it an addiction? What are some of the qualities that if someone was listening and they wondered about, am I addicted? What are some of the trademarks that would help someone sort of start the diagnosis process? And do you even recommend that they look at it that way?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't say let's dive right down the diagnostics. I'm a person who just, diagnostics are help us explain things or help us to understand, make sense of what's going on, but they don't necessarily always we don't want to put our identity in those diagnostics either. So I'm kind of in a place where I try to be in the middle there. The one thing I guess I'd say, first thing I think about is thought life. A lot of this stuff across the board with mental health comes from your thought life. What's your thought life about? What are you thinking about? What's on your mind? The more you focus on sex, the big one I hear a lot about times we call preoccupation, meaning that people are just highly focused on if you're a man, the women you see in the society, the men you see in society, and focusing on fantasizing about those people. A lot of folks talk about objectifying. So they turn the person into an object, they sexualize them, they fantasize about them, and they can't get them out of their mind. That's a big one. So the first part would be, how much are you thinking about sex? And again, we don't really know a lot of times in society, we don't know how to necessarily balance that, because what is too much? I'd say if it's the point that I can't stop thinking about it, then it's probably too much. So how much am I really thinking about it? And then the other thing I guess I'd say with that too is, does that translate then into behavior, in the sense, am I watching a lot of pornography when I've already said I was going to stop? So similar to other addictions, you're going to consume this behavior, you're going to consume this, we'll call a substance, even though it's a little bit different, but it's still the same idea. We're consuming it. And then what ends up translating is that my life is now affected or disturbed by the fact that I continue to do this, even though I said I was going to stop. That's another one. Third one you might look for is isolation. People typically who are acting out tend to isolate more from other people. And what I mean by that is that they tend to just get away from folks. Sometimes it's because of shame. Sometimes because they feel like they just are overwhelmed by this behavior and they just don't want to. It's easier to go watch porn and feel better, as we were kind of mentioning earlier, than to try to focus on the relationships they have with people. So isolation would be a big one. Do I find myself just not wanting to be around people? And does that turn into then me acting out more? So those are some things I guess I'd say probably that most people can kind of see in their own life if that's really happening. And I think being in reality is a big part of that, because what happens for a lot of folks is a lot of people are in denial. This one, probably more than any of the other addictions, you can be in more denial than anywhere else because you minimize it. This isn't happening as much as it is. I'm not giving this amount of time to it. I'm being more, everybody else does it. That's a very common one. So there's always a minimization piece to it. So the more we're in denial, the more likely we're probably involved in behavior it's unhealthy for us.
Let's take a quick break.
Hey guys, what would it be like if you could last 10 times longer when you're having sex?
We are going to teach you how to gain massive confidence as a lover, all without performance anxiety, gimmicks, or prescription.
This course is perfect for you if you've ever been mortified by a sexual encounter that ended way too early.
Or if you've ever avoided intimacy out of fear that you won't last as long as your lover desires. Or maybe you long to give your partner multiple orgasms but can't last long enough to make that a reality.
Well, good news, we've got your back, and it's in our course, Last 10 Times Longer. Go to sexreimagined.com/last the number 10 X-longer.
And for all of our favorite listeners out there, we are giving you a discount, 20% off, y'all. Just put in podcast 20, all caps, podcast 20, to get your 20% off of this phenomenal course that you're going to want to review more than once.
The link is in the show notes. We cannot wait to see you inside this course. Plus, don't forget, we always got tons of bonuses. See you there. How many people are acting out in the way of like risky sexual behavior, meaning they might be cheating, they may be seeing escorts, they may be taking it even further than just watching on the computer?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say it's 50-50 by any means, but I'd say maybe
60-40.
Possibly, but maybe a little higher. 70. I'd probably go 70-30, maybe, in the sense of 30 being people with more high risky behavior, typically. So what I found is that more people who are younger, typically, unless it's continued to elevate to the point that now the fantasy is turning into reality for them, they usually stay within the realm kind of porn. And again, that there can be a lot of risk with that too. So there's certainly an element of what that, I'd add porn also with chat rooms and those kind of things in that sense as well. So then you have people who are, when that escalates into high risky behaviors, now we're talking about, sex in public, escorts, massage parlors, pretty common, those kind of behaviors. So then you have more folks who are kind of on that side of it. And again, depending on what that looks like for their behavior and why they might be doing that, those are impactful. Those certainly will help people, I think, become more aware that there's something going on, especially if they have a relationship that their primary relationship they're involved in, because those things become very clear, right? Hey, look, I'm going to these things, I'm doing these massage parlors, I'm going to escorts, even though I said I wasn't going to do that. So there's an element of that. I think that that helps break more denial, maybe than pornography will.
And then I suppose some of the consequences are like you're spending more money, right? You're spending money on porn, or you're spending money going to parlors and spending money on escorts, and then that can escalate and put people in debt and further disrupt their relationship if they're in one, breaking down trust, betrayal, so on and so forth. Before I ask my question, I just want to give Willow a chance, because I think she had a question on the tip of her tongue, and I can remember mine.
I was just wondering, what's the what's your take on sexuality being a taboo topic in our culture, even in today's, world that's a little bit more liberated, having an effect on people becoming so addicted to this thing? Like, if we were talking more freely about sexuality, if they were growing up with conversations, with their family and with their friends, where they could, if there wasn't this underlying element of shame and hiding around sexuality, do you think people would have a different relationship to it? Again, we get addicted to the chemicals that those really intense porn scenes give us. But would we be craving those as much?
And would our recovery be different? If we could talk more openly, would we seek recovery in a different way or have better conversations with our partners?
Well, I think people would look at it definitely much more of a healthier way, for sure. Because I think one of the things we look for, did people come from a background that's been very rigid, or has it been very, again, taboo type topics? Because the more rigidity you have, and I've had questions about, how early do you start talking to your kids about it and things like that. I always say, whatever's again, age appropriate from some perspective is starting to educate kids, I think is going to be helpful because it gets that conversation moving in that direction. So again, I'm not advocating that we should go out and tell them everything at one time. It's more of just, gradual, gradual education for them as we go. But yeah, I think it would really change the perspective on how people, it's not something that would have to be hidden. You're more open about, you learn what's unhealthy and healthy, which is really, if we're talking about societally, why we have so much disparity is that we really don't know what's healthy and what's unhealthy. One of the things I've always considered, as I've started working in this part of the field has been, unhealthy sexual behavior really seems to be self-serving. Healthy sexual behavior always seems to be relationally giving. So you're going to have a translation of either you're turning into a relationship or you're going to turn into yourself. And so a lot of times I think when we're talking about unhealthy sexual behavior, it's almost always about yourself. It's always about what you can get out of it, what you can see out of it. Masturbation's all about yourself, what you're looking at, how you're going to interact with that. Those are all about you. Healthy relational sex is about relationships. You're turning back into your partner. You're making it about each other. You're having that closeness and building that intimacy. A lot of people fear intimacy. They fear bringing their wall down. And so the example I always give is, I don't know if you read the Home Improvement show, Tim Allen, when he had that neighbor that had the fence way up. That's my example, I think, of people who don't want to be intimate, right? They have this fence up in their life and they don't want people to see what's in their yard. They're embarrassed of that. They're shameful of it. Maybe it's some really, been really difficult things in their life, but they don't want people to know about that. So they just keep the fence up. And so they don't have any intimacy with their partner. And so the higher your fence is, the more likely that you're going to be afraid to bring it down. And so what ends up happening is, back to like our original kind of question about that was that there is some shame about that. People that put their fence up when they talk about sex, because that's kind of the cultural, sort of overview of it. So I think that definitely having more conversations about help to start bringing that fence down. And it also gives you an opportunity to have more connection with other people, that there are other people who are going through a lot of the same things that you are, which is another part of what we see a lot of is people think that they're the only ones suffering with this. Everybody else is normal. They're abnormal.
Can feel very isolating.
Yeah. That's not true at all. Everybody, more people are probably going through this than anybody really understands.
Yeah, I like that distinction too of the taking, taking versus giving. Like, are you trying to get something out of it for yourself, or is it for the union, the partnership? Vulnerability is the thing about intimacy that I think is so scary for people because, we've said this before on the show, but vulnerable translates to woundable. Like literally that's the point. You could get hurt, but you won't be able to feel that depth of connection and love without taking that risk, because you really have to show all of yourself to get to that level of phenomenal deep connection and love that we all deserve. And so it feels like this cultural taboo and shame around sexuality has for so long, for so many eons, has been causing such a disservice to our ability to just be seen by each other and to be in that intimate space with each other, which is one of the most beautiful things that we have access to as human beings.
Well, to that point, I think also people don't think they're worthy of connection. They don't think they're worthy of that partnership. They don't think they're beautiful enough to get the girl or get the guy or whatever. That insecure lack of confidence that stops them from pursuing the relational. And so they often feel like in the isolation of that, this is your only option. It's just you, baby, And so again, it's like that, that self-centeredness, although I don't know that I like labeling that. It's just sometimes out of desperation of being able to move your energy, you go towards the easy path. You don't challenge yourself. You don't push yourself through that vulnerable moment of taking a risk and going, hey, I think you're really cute, and trying to have a more connection with others. Is that resonate with what you are seeing, Patrick?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the belief system is huge, right? Belief system, I would tell guys a lot of times I work with, you're wearing those glasses, whatever those glasses are of your beliefs, that's what you look at the world with. And if your belief is you're not worthy, you're not gonna pursue those things, because why would you do that? No one's gonna, if you think that no one's going to want to be with you, or no one's going to want to love you, or no one's going to want to learn how to accept your positive and your negative together, you're gonna want to be isolated from that. So And I know in even my own personal experience, I mean, that was, there was a time in my life where I did the same thing. I had those glasses on, and
Sure,
I
we've all
was
been
wondering,
there.
yeah, everybody's
Yeah.
been there. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Part
so
of
there's
it.
certainly an aspect of that that's very true. So I think a lot of times, what are people's belief systems play a huge role in how they think, and it goes back to we talked about thought life. So much of it comes out of what you're thinking about you, what you think about the world, what you think about sex, how you define that, and like we were kind of talking about earlier, going back to when you're 8, 9 years old, if your understanding of sex is about you, which is really most all pornography, if not I would say all pornography is that way. If that's what you've learned sex is, then it's going to be hard to differentiate between this is what I know sex is as with me, and this is what sex is in a relationship. Those are going to be two foreign concepts. So if you learn this is what sex is by masturbating, then it might be difficult to try to transition over to the relational piece, and we do see that from time to time as well.
Okay, I have 2 questions. One is, how do you think we could get into the school systems and shift things there in order to help young kids who are coming into their sexual time in their life? And the second one, they're not related, is, or maybe they are, is like if somebody's, having their first exposure at 8, 9, and by 15, they're like chemically addicted to it. And by the time they're 35, they still haven't had an actual relationship. And then they're 45 or 55 and they're coming to you and they're like, I don't know what to do,
Yeah.
like how, or somebody who's like, oh, I just started getting into porn around, 40 and I've been, dabbling and I'm starting to see that I'm getting more addicted. Like, what's the recovery process based on sort of that range of people getting involved with it?
Yeah. Okay. So the first question, what can we do to get in the school system? Well, I would say that from my experience, when I had what they call freshman transitions, which is mostly my health class, you probably need to have a little more education about why this is a bad thing. I think, or why it's an unhealthy thing, I should say. It's more proper term use there. So what I would say is that one of the things that I think throughout the process of being an adolescent, right, you have to know, it's one thing to say this is unhealthy, but what's the reason why behind it? And so I think a lot of people will just hear this is bad, this isn't good, whatever the case might be. And so then there's a curiosity that springs up from that. And so there's a desire to try and know more about what that is. And then that can kind of lead down that path. I think it helps educating people about why these things are unhealthy. Now, if people choose to do that beyond that, I mean, there's only so much we can control. But I think, can we educate people from the perspective of why pornography specifically, since we're talking about that, why pornography is unhealthy? Why is this something that's not good for you as a person? And I think you can kind of work through some of that and help people understand that. And I think more adolescents would be open to the idea of staying away from it if they kind of knew where some of the damage it could do. Mm-hmm. That translates into to answer your second question is about what's the recovery process. So everybody's kind of in a different place in the recovery. There's lots of different types of fellowships out there. In America, we have SA, which is Sexaholics Anonymous. We got a lot of 12-step kind of programs. Those are very good for people, especially if they've been isolated. It's good to kind of have other, community of our people around. Those are not therapist led. They are not usually engaging with like therapy type of stuff. So it's just, again, more of a group setting.
Right. But it's free. So people who don't have resources.
Yep. It is definitely a resource. There are a bunch of them online. They're around the world. There's lots of SLA is another one, Sex and Love Acts Anonymous, Celebrate Recovery, if you're more faith-based, that there's some of those one like that.
But how much are those like directed towards porn? Because that often has to do with like sex and acting out sexually that can go beyond porn, right? Are they, I mean, I don't know if you know this answer. I don't know if you lead any of these groups.
I don't. So I'm not like directly, like I don't have a direct, to say that, but I know a lot of people who are part of, they do talk about that can be a good support for them, even if it's about porn or acting out other ways. Our program we have, our recovery program is really a 3-step process, and it's coming out of Dr. Patrick Eilers. He's kind of the guy as far as like addiction research that's out there, and especially relating around sexual addiction. He started the research in the 80s. And so his program is really a 3-step process. So you have the individual work, which is working with me. We have a recovery group that's therapist led. So those are a little bit different than like a 12-step program. And then we have a sponsorship, a guy that's kind of mentoring one of the other individuals in the program that, is further along. So though the research suggests or shows that in that sense, though that setup of those 3 approaches with those together yield the best results for people and again, depending on if they need to be inpatient or outpatient, again, that's another part of it too. We're outpatient. So again, that's the setup we use with the outpatient program. If you're inpatient, it's going to be a little more similar to like a substance inpatient, where you're going to go and they're going to remove you from the substance for 40 days. They're going to do a lot of intense therapy, and then they're going to send you back to an outpatient setting like we have. So it's a little bit, it depends on kind of where you're at as far as how it's affecting you. And so one of the things I always encourage people is, if they are interested in finding out about, sort of where they would sort of land, a good assessment to take is one called an SDI, a sexual dependency inventory. And those can be administered by a CSAT, which is what I am, as a certified sex addiction therapist. And so that assessment actually will tell you kind of where you stand compared to the average population. That's, find my words. And they'll give you an idea whether or not inpatient or outpatient is a good fit for you. If you want to look at recovery programs. So there's some different things with that the SDI can help people know about. So I always encourage people to think about that. If they're concerned about it, that's a good way to go.
And so how would people just Google SDI?
So it's something that we have to administer. So there's usually, at least in our case, there's a cost to it. So you have to come in and be part of at least for 1 or 2 sessions to kind of get some background.
It's like an initial assessment, basically.
Right,
yeah.
but
it's
I'm wanting
we do
to know
real
how
early.
people would find providers of this, especially if they're not in Michigan, because it sounds like you have to go in person, or can you do these things virtually?
So we do them virtual too. So again, we send, there's a link that we send and people take it online. It's an online assessment. Then we get the results and then we would virtually present it to them. Again, not just in Michigan. So across the country, in the United States, I think it's across the world, they have, there's CSAT is, we're part of a group that's, trying to think of it. The actual grouping is basically the certified sexual addiction therapist is from a group of therapists that, there are specified, or we're specialized in that particular area. So as far as that, if you looked up certified sex addiction therapists, you would find people who are certified for that. So
kind of like acupuncturists who are certified in fertility, like Fayborn. They have this whole sect of acupuncturists. It's like an additional sort of thing after you get your therapy license. Yeah.
I was thinking about
the group's called ITAP. My apologies. I had to look.
Oh, yeah, it's right behind
good.
you. Just take a look. What's it called? ITAP?
ITAP is that's our certification group. So,
okay.
I don't
so
know
maybe
exactly.
If you're a therapist listening and you want to start to specialize in this area, where would you go to get training?
So there's an ITAP website, iitap.com.
Okay.
And so you can do the training there. It's a 4-week training in total, but it ends up being like spread out. So you do them in different mods. And then there's a period where you have to be do some supervision with somebody.
That's not too much extra.
It's not.
No, that's great. Yeah.
No, it's a pretty. I wouldn't say it's easy, but say it's a relatively quick process. It's shorter than it actually feels like at the beginning. But you get some good training on, and then they basically put you in a position where you can be able to work with the people who specifically are struggling with this, and we're in a position where we need there's definitely a need for people. That's one of the reasons why I got involved with it, was because not only from my own personal story, but also just from the fact that I saw as a need, and it's an area where if there's not a lot of people to help, love them to jump in and help if I can. So it was an opportunity to come here 4 years ago to start where I'm at. So this is so I've been doing this, like I said, about 4 years now. So
speaking of your own personal story, tell us a little bit about your genesis story, darling. Like, how did you get into therapy, and what kind of led you toward this road of helping people overcome porn addiction?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I grew up with a lot of I never really had a specific skill set that I could ever measure. So I was never really good at math or really good at history or whatever. I had a lot of little things I was good at, but I never really had a specific kind of growing up as hey, I really want to do this or want to do that or whatever. In high school, a lot of people would come to me with all their stuff, their problems, what's going on in life. And they just would talk to me about stuff, and I just listen. And so that was kind of me. I didn't have a lot of friends, so I figured, well, I guess these are the people I'm going to hang out with. And so, by my senior year, I felt called to this career, and the main thing was there's a video out there, and there's a lot of different versions of it now. But basically, people have these big cards, and they have an identity that they wrote on their card, and they come out and they flip the card, and the card has a different identity on the back of it. And for me, that was my inspiring. That was I want to be part of something like that. I want to help people, flip their identity, so to speak, in that way for something healthy. So. Cool. I started the journey working. I did 4 years of psychology. Then I did 3.5 years in master's program doing my master's actually is in clinical counseling psychology. So I kind of started with that, and I have a little bit of a theological background with some of that stuff that I've done. So I kind of have an integration piece there. And then I was a general practitioner for most of the first about 6 years of my, 4 years of my career. So I worked a couple different cities, and I was at a relatively moderate sized practice. Then I moved to a startup practice. So I was actually able to start for the practice from the ground up, which was really cool. I did some adjunct professor teaching. I was an adjunct professor for a couple of colleges for a little while. I worked in the prison system as an adjunct professor for a short period of time. And then when I had an opportunity to come to North Point, really happened during the pandemic. So then there was an opportunity to come here. So I made the switch, and I've been here ever since. And so this has been kind of where I'm at right now. And I do have a long-term goal of eventually I'd like to be a supervisor and work on helping people, the other therapists. That's kind of my goal in the end right now. But, I also like doing this kind of stuff too. So lots of different interests, lots of different parts as far as, again, I saw this as a need, and this is something where I'm like, hey, this is, I want to help out if I can. And, I've also had my own experience, I was younger, certainly adolescent, young adult, my own struggles with pornography as far as overcoming that, and just, being part of that, in my own life is just like, I know that can definitely be, it can feel very shackling for people. So I can understand why people, just get stuck in it.
Now, Patrick, I specialize in sexual healing, specifically with trauma having to do with sexual abuse. And it seems to me that a lot of people, that the part of their story is one of two things. One is very religious, shame-filled sex negativity, certain conditioning that makes the body bad. And then as a result, they're being exposed to people who are acting out their sexuality in more covert, dangerous ways, especially with children. And then on the other side is people that were overexposed. It wasn't that they had a rigid religious conditioning that kind of kept this feeling of secrecy. It was that they lived in a household where they were overexposed to sexuality. Porn was on the TV all the time. Dad had a subscription to Playboy TV. Magazines were everywhere. And then sometimes there were like parties involved, and parents had just had a lifestyle that overexposed a kid, a teen, even, just sort of in that, in the raising of that. Now, that's a smaller percentage as opposed to those that were sexually abused due to restriction. So I'm curious how much of that has played into the storyline of leading people down a path that are finding themselves stuck and in a way that you're helping them now.
Yeah, I think there certainly is a percentage of people, like you said, on the other side of it, right? The people who've been overexposed, and certainly people who, again, we talk about kind of that exposure online is part of that, but then certainly lifestyle among parents is obviously what is normed. I always think about, whatever your norm you're working from is probably what you're going to go back to, whether or not it's unhealthy or healthy. You got to be aware of what that looks like. And so, yeah, definitely a piece of that for sure. If you've been exposed to, mom and dad really didn't think this was a concern. They didn't really keep me from it. Those kind of things. Yeah, certainly is a percentage of people that are on that side as well. It just seems like there's a lot of extremes with it, and just a lot of addiction and kind of the way people process those. It's just, again, it's either it's so strict that there's a curiosity, or it's so overexposed. It's, there's no boundaries. So
yeah. It almost seems like there's an adopting of the behavior, or there's a rejection of the behavior. Like I know some people. One of the places I'm trained is in Tantra in terms of the sexuality aspect of it, which is sort of a sacred approach to looking at sex and intimacy. And although I've known people whose parents were very tantric, and they are like, no way, I don't want it to do with Tantra. And so there's a rebellion against some of these concepts, as much as there's an adoption of whatever was normal growing up. How is the treatment? Like, is it abstinence from porn? Is it a gradual weaning? And when I say weaning, I mean most of the treatments that I've looked up, it's abstinence from porn, and then with an encouragement to use your imagination to get off the brain hook, the neural pathway, they get stronger and stronger due to repeat exposure. And the fact that the visual video in particular has a neurological consequence that is more severe than looking at magazines or reading erotica, things of that nature, because you have to use your imagination more in those other mediums. So
Right.
what's that part? What's the practical part of the treatment?
Let's take a quick break.
Ladies, do you want to explore your sexuality and experience true sexual healing?
The Vaginal Orgasms Masterclass teaches you and your partners how to unlock your full sexual potential and awaken the G-spot, the sacred spot, and the cervix for an unforgettable sexual experience. Would learning how to finally surrender and release grief, fear, and uncertainty benefit your outlook on life, love, and relationships? We certainly think so. Common misconceptions of the G-spot, including its anatomy and function as an erogenous zone, will be covered in this course.
Plus, we're going to teach you 7 different massage strokes for the G-spot that dissolve blocked energy and increase your pleasure tenfold.
We're going to teach you how to locate the sacred spot and the best methods to stimulate it for maximum pleasure.
And you're going to learn about cervical orgasm techniques, which are the most powerful and also often elusive style of climaxing. You know, this class is primarily geared toward women, but men have taken it as well and learned so much about how to pleasure their partners.
So get ready for multiple O's, my friends. And you can get all of that at sexreimagine.com/female-masterclass. And for being a listener of the show, we've got a beautiful coupon code for you. It is 20% off this course. Just type in podcast20, that's all caps, podcast20, and get yourself a great deal on this on-demand course.
So in the recovery program, again, it really depends. I think, first off, if the person's in a relationship. If they're in a relationship, I mean, porn abstinence is number one. If you're talking about like, okay, we're gonna hit the reset here. Let's working on reducing that, changing the behavior, working on not having any slips or relapses, meaning they're not going to go back to the old behavior. So really from day one, you're kind of talking about, okay, like here's some things I'm identifying as unhealthy behavior. Here's what I'm identifying as things that put me in danger of that behavior. And then what's my focus? Where am I sort of going? I think about, if you're when you bowl, you have to kind of focus on where you want to target the pin. So when you throw the bowling ball down the alley, it stays on track. So it doesn't go one side or the other. When you lose focus, the ball is going to go to one extreme or the other, right? And that's very much what people typically do, right? So they overindulge or they tend to sort of be avoidant. So you can have on both of those extremes.
Okay.
Once you've kind of established that sort of idea of sobriety, usually it takes about 90 days is when the brain starts to change those pathways again and, start rebuilding a new freeway, so to speak, in your brain. Then you can transition into more of, doing a little bit more of the deeper work. And as you do more of that kind of background of what's going on in your own life, you're also kind of trying to work toward rebuilding the relationship. Now, some relationships, depending on where they're at, they may actually do a disclosure process, which is that's a whole other additional piece to the relationship before we do any relational work. I don't do disclosures, but my colleagues in the office do those. So there's a part of that, there's a whole process to just being able to get back to, the relationship, being able to connect again and work together. Because a lot of that, when you have partner trauma, even if the person's not acting out anymore, the partner still thinks that they are. So there's a lot of those behaviors that are they tend to look for those. So
what does disclosure mean exactly? Does that mean they're getting honest about what it is that's been happening with them, or maybe they've been withholding honesty? What does
so
that mean?
that's ultimately what the goal is to in our case there's a 5-stage sort of there's a 5-stage bridge to kind of reconnecting the relationship. So you think about the relationships now 2 islands, and we want to kind of bring those back together. So there's a process to bring them together. But when you do a disclosure, you're just total transparency. So everything, and the partner may ask from birth till now, what was all the things you've been doing? What are the things you've been part of? And so you have a whole document you work through. And then at the end of that, there's a polygraph piece to verify. Again, non-criminal polygraph. There's a whole detail to it. But basically the idea there is that the polygraph helps to help the person evidence that they're telling the truth.
Right.
So a therapeutic polygraph is to give them, So the goal there is that the person is saying, okay, yes, this document is 100% accurate. Here's what evidence is that as being true. And now we can kind of move forward. And then, of course, the partner is also working on their part of understanding the trauma that's happened to them so that they can be able to heal as well. One of the things I tell the guys a lot is that, if your relationship, if it's an aquarium, there's a bunch of living organisms in it. And if you introduce a betrayal, it's like dropping a couple red drops of food coloring in the tank. You can't take the water out of the tank if you want the relationship to continue. So you got to learn how it's going to work together. And that's not something you can do alone and fix that, right? You both have to do that. So that's another part of it that sometimes
Interesting. I like that.
gets derailed, because a lot of times the partners are like, no, I don't want anything to do with this because I didn't do it. And that's 100% accurate. But it also, at the same time, means that you're also affected by it, which is unfortunate, but is part of the facts that you have to work with.
I gotta say, Patrick, I love your use of analogies. I mean,
Yes,
you've had
nice
so many good
metaphors.
analogies, metaphors. Yeah, so good.
Well, I've had
It's so helpful
4 years
to
work.
like,
I'm still working on more. I still got more.
yeah,
working.
it's so helpful for people to understand through metaphor. You know, it
Yeah.
just gives a better understanding. So it's great.
Yeah. So I had another question in there regarding the whole treatment process. And that is, where does sex positivity come back? I mean, I have watched how years of watching porn starts to shift an awareness to what someone is sexually attracted to, what turns them on. And going back to vanilla, maybe an unrealistic expectation to how this person wants or needs or desires to express those desires, especially if they're going to shift from this sort of solo-based, self-centered based sexual expression to going, I want to share myself with someone else and I want to also turn them on. So I can only imagine that one of the obstacles is if one partner's been left behind in the relationship, and now the person who's been isolating themselves watching this video, and it keeps escalating to I don't want to say stranger
Stronger.
and darker,
It can
but
be. Absolutely. It can
that
be.
is a pattern. Okay, so there's that. And then I want to
Right.
add one other element to that is that another thing that I keep receiving, where I see in my practice all the time, is the dysfunction that occurs sexually, meaning premature ejaculation goes up,
Yeah.
erectile dysfunction goes up. So here you are trying to repair with your partner, and you can't have the same kind of sex. The same kind of sex isn't working. There's
Right.
something, so it's like you can
Yeah.
see, folks, how painful this is.
Yeah, and there's a lot there, but I'll try to see if I can give you
Yeah.
a couple practical pieces from it. So the first thing I'd say is that, right, everybody has what they call an arousal template. And so our arousal template is basically like a sheet of paper. And when you take ink and you put your thumb in ink and you push your thumb in the paper, that's your first experience with sex, whatever that looks like, right? So if you've had, you masturbated to porn or you masturbated alone or whatever that looks like, or maybe you had sex with somebody the first time, whatever, that's going to be your imprint. That's your deepest imprint. It's going to be the darkest one. Now, you can continue to put thumbprints all the way down the paper, but every time you do that, you're going to have less, those are going to be less and less ink, so they're going to be less and less impactful. So what we find is a lot of times people will usually return to whatever their first experience was as being their one that they fantasize, or a lot of their fantasies kind of around
Kind of like
that.
a core erotic theme. Is that the same thing? Okay.
Yeah, kind of like that. Yeah. So there's like the same kind of transition with that. So like, again, the arousal template, that first imprint usually is really impactful.
That's interesting.
So transitioning that to what you were kind of saying earlier, right, is how does that look like for people understanding healthy sexuality? At the beginning of the program, they actually lay out 12 dimensions. Dr. Kearns has found 12 dimensions of healthy sexuality. And so a lot of those have to do with, the back half of them are more about the actual relationship. The front half are all about you. So dimension 1 is nurturing. Dimension 2 is sensuality, being attuned to your senses. Dimension 3 is your image. Dimension 4 is your self-definition. Dimension 5 is how comfortable are you at talking about sex. Dimension 6 is how much do you actually know about sex. Dimension 7 is partnership with other people, relationships with other people. Dimension 8 is partnership with your spouse or your significant other. So see, as it transitions, it goes
I
from
love
you
that.
to there. So what ends up happening is a lot of times a lot of my conversations, I say at the start, other people too, I don't even really talk that much about sex. I talk more about, partner, people and their impacts to their life and what's, kind of about what's going on for them.
Yeah.
Much more than we were talking really about sex itself, because sex
Right.
is just sort of the vehicle by which people are using to try to feel better. And so
Right.
going back to like the idea, like we were saying, like there's so much nurturing is your number one. If you're not willing to, back to isolation, if you're not willing to have a two-way street of nurturing, you're never going to be able to be with somebody in a true, transparent, intimate way, because there's only your path there's only one road being attained to you, but you're not willing to go the other side of the road. So you have to have that nurturing piece. And so kind of back to like you're asking is that there's really, I think when you're transitioning people from what pornography's taught them, it's really about, okay, yes, stopping. So there is a piece of that is abstaining from pornography, but then learning what it means to actually have a connection, healthy way with my partner, and redefining that as a way that I'm turning into the relationship rather than just being about myself. So there is a piece of that, like can I start to learn what that is, and can that be more powerful than what my previous experience had been?
Let's take a quick break.
Hey guys, what would it be like if you could last 10 times longer when you're having sex?
We are going to teach you how to gain massive confidence as a lover, all without performance anxiety, gimmicks, or prescription.
This course is perfect for you if you've ever been mortified by a sexual encounter that ended way too early.
Or if you've ever avoided intimacy out of fear that you won't last as long as your lover desires. Or maybe you long to give your partner multiple orgasms but can't last long enough to make that a reality.
Well, good news, we've got your back. And it's in our course, Last 10 Times Longer. Go to sexreimagined.com/last dash the number 10 X dash longer.
And for all of our favorite listeners out there, we are giving you a discount, 20% off, y'all. Just put in podcast 20, all caps, podcast 20 to get your 20% off of this phenomenal course that you're going to want to review more than once.
We cannot wait to see you inside this course. Plus, don't forget, we always got tons of bonuses. See you there.
This is so good. I want to have you back on the show, Patrick.
I know. I want to talk about those categories.
Yeah, I want to go deep with those categories for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're going to have a whole show on that.
Yeah. I love it.
Tell our audience where they can find you and how they can work with you.
Okay, so the practice that I'm part of, our website is northpoint-counseling.com. So that's the best way to get a hold of us as any of the clinicians. We've been here my boss started the practice back in 2010, so we've been here about 13 years or so. So we're definitely would check us out there. We're actually going to be starting our own podcast, so definitely check that out as well.
It's good. What's the name of it going to be?
It's called North Point Perspective. So it's going to be a new podcast we're starting. It's going to hopefully be weekly. I'll be part of it. My boss will be part of it. Some of our colleagues will be part of it. So we're looking forward to that.
Great.
Cool.
You can reach me on Instagram. rated_PGE is my personal Instagram. I also have a Threads account attached to that too. I have a LinkedIn at my name, Patrick Eilers. My licensed LPC CSAT. So if there's other Patrick Eilers out there, so not to get confused, but
we'll have links in the show notes too.
We'll put all that.
So those are some different areas you can check us out at, and definitely if there's anything that it'd be great to be back and have an opportunity to talk more about some of those other dimensions.
Yeah,
great,
so much
great.
here.
Thank
so
you
rich.
so much, Patrick.
Really
thank you so much for having me.
Give a big hug to Michigan from me. But I'm glad I'm not in that weather.
Well, it's a little warmer now. It was like I think it was like 8 or something last week. So now we're up to 40. So
That sounds terrible.
God bless. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in, and don't miss what's up next. We've got the dish for you, where Dr. Willow and I will throw down on this whole situation, our experience, and some of the beautiful things that Patrick has brought to the table. So have a beautiful day. Do not forget to subscribe and leave us a review.
Much love, y'all.
Now, our favorite part, the dish.
We're talking porn addiction on the dish.
Oh my gosh, porn addiction is so challenging for individuals, and it's shameful. It's not something that you're like raising your hand saying you have. I mean, all addiction is shameful. That's kind of part of why it.
Yeah, all addiction is challenging.
Yeah.
Because you're so chemically wired for it. After
and there's also this like shadow to it of like, God, I shouldn't be doing. Like you're always down on yourself for doing the thing that you enjoy. I mean, there was something I feel like he was saying, I can't remember exactly what, but something about like the more you try not to, or the more you try to resist it, the more persistent it is. What's that old adage? What you resist persists. And so I think that's one of the really careful things you have to take into consideration when dealing with addiction. And as I touched on a little bit, but didn't go into too much detail, you can actually change your brain chemistry within 24 hours with amino acids. So whether you're addicted to drugs or alcohol, sugar, or sex, like you can actually, there's these little receptor sites in your brain that are like little Pac-Mans, and they want that fix of sugar or alcohol or
Well,
or
how do you get
oxytocin,
'em?
dopamine hits, or all you got to do is put the right amino acid in that receptor site, and that little Pac-Man is satiated. It's a really, I actually wanted to, when we have him back, I'll have to ask him if they use amino
Oh,
acid
I
therapy
doubt it.
at
I
all.
think he would have said something. I think that's
Yeah.
probably very uncommon.
Yeah, because I did
And
mention
certainly
it.
not a part of like traditional therapy. When
Yeah,
you
yeah,
ever
yeah.
hear, the only time I've ever heard anyone talk about amino acids in a health medical treatment formula, it's been with a naturopath.
Okay.
So I'm 99.9% sure
Sure they
he's got
don't
nothing
use
to
it.
know about it. Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. One, you said you have to have the right formula.
Mhm.
And then two, where do you get them? Do you have to
Yeah,
are they
well,
prescription only?
no, I mean, you can get them on the shelves at the health food store. But really, amino acids come in meats. They come in especially red meats. So those who are the most deficient in them tend to be vegetarians. And that was me. I was vegetarian for a long time. And I was like, God, why am I so addicted to sugar? Why am I so addicted to these certain things? And it was because that little receptor site didn't have the actual protein that it needed. So you can use them supplementally. Julia Ross is like the leader in this field, and she has she's whole inpatient clinics where people come and they stay there and they deal with their addiction through nutrition. It's really cool stuff. So
Fascinating.
if you are interested in that, check out, there's 2 books. One's called The Diet Cure. One's called The Mood Cure by Julia Ross. And you can learn all about amino acid therapy, or you can come have a conversation with me because I've been studying it and using it for a long time. It's an incredible way to overcome stuff. So
Who is
just
it not good for?
nobody.
Because I eat meat. I mean, who's to say that I'm deficient in any amino acids? Would it still help me
Yeah,
if
it
I
would
had an
still help you.
addiction?
Yeah.
Okay. And
And
how
then,
do
of
you
course,
measure? Like, are there tests that you take to see which amino acid they're deficient in? Or
so with her clinical work, she does, I think, do blood work and stuff.
okay.
But similar to giving hormones, bioidentical hormones, they'll start to give the hormones before certain people will start to give the hormones before they do an actual blood test to kind of like start to feed the deficiency that they see clinically and symptomatically, and then they'll run tests to see how that's mapping out inside the body. But really, we want to just change the symptoms. But of course, with sexual addiction and with porn addiction, there's a lot more going on than just brain chemistry,
yeah, a lot of
right?
it's environmental, cultural conditioning, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
That's more psychological than it is nutrition. But I think that that's one area nutritionally where like no one's talking about that. No one's thought that through. Except
Yeah,
for Julia.
I know. Well, I mean, she doesn't really talk about sexual addiction in her books, but every time that I have ever had a client who's coming to overcome porn addiction, or they might be coming for erectile dysfunction or premature ejaculation, and we dig a little deeper, and there tends to be like, wow, okay, you have this, like, you can't live without it. You can't go 2 days without pornography. Okay, I'm going to call that an addiction. And so I do start to look at their diet right away. I'm like, what are you eating? And they're just not eating well, and they're not drinking enough water. And so we shift to that, and all of a sudden they just have more vitality. They have more space. They have more capacity.
They're more resourced.
Yeah, to then deal with their psychological stuff that is causing the addiction.
Yeah. So, this connection between denial and resistance.
Yeah, that
How
was interesting.
interwoven those two are. It's when you can't admit that that you're off track, and you've got a lot of excuses that you try to prove to yourself that you're not off track, even though your partner is upset and confused and you're less present and you're not really showing up for sex in your relationship because you already have a sexual life. That's easier. You press a button, you can do play, and no one's harping on you. No one is. And so, although they're harping on you because they're wondering why you're not fucking them. Because you're satisfied. You already ejaculated 2 or 3 times that day.
That was one of the things we didn't get to talk about much either, is just the effect that it has on partners. When I've had a lot of female clients whose partners are addicted to pornography, and how painful that can be for them, and how they just feel up against a wall. Like, because when we become our partner's guide and teacher, that generally doesn't work. So it's like, and what he said was usually it's the partner that's bringing them into therapy. The partner is like, this has to change or
the
we're not going to.
consequences are real now.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have seminars designed to for the spouse to be able to process the negative impact this has had on their self-esteem, on their worldview, on their belief system, on the impotency of feeling like you're nothing you're trying is working to help your partner return back to you.
Right.
And all of that. I do like that they work with the partners together and start to go, okay, yes, this is the other person's problem, but if you're a partnership, there is a place where you have to partner on resolving the problem.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
I think a lot of people through their anger are just like, well, you got to fix it. It's your problem. You fix it.
Totally.
And there comes
That
a
doesn't
point where
help.
that's not going to actually bring you closer. And really, it's just a justification for you to stay angry.
So I'm so curious, in all of your years of teaching Tantra seminars, like have you had couples come through where that is the case? One person is addicted to pornography or sex addict in some way, and there's a disparity between the couples, and they're kind of coming for that.
But it's not a huge theme.
No, okay.
Especially in the classrooms, there's not time for people to sort of bring up that. On occasion, it would happen. In my private practice, yes, on occasion it comes up through the couples, but again, they're going to probably tell me that down the line if it's there.
Yeah.
On occasion, they'll lead with it, but where I see it the most is in individuals, is with someone who is acting out, and part of their acting out is actually contacting me. They're still being driven in, I need novelty. I need, and so when I ask more questions about what's going on in their emotional, psychological life, what's going on for them spiritually, if they're in a partnership, why isn't their partner here with them? And so you're getting threads of what's going on. And so the reason why they come to me is often premature ejaculation is a big one. And also I'm having problems with erections. And as I dig more and more, well, there's that bubble. Thought I took you off, bubble.
Good job, Leah. Thumbs up on that.
Yeah. And so what's interesting is that starts to unravel. And so their motivation might have been, oh, well, I saw you online and I thought you were pretty and I know you're into the sex. I'm like, did you really read everything that I do? No, they just see Tantra, they see my picture and they go, hopefully another unhealthy, not that they're thinking unhealthy, but another way to get off. Will and I have to spend time screening our calls because one of the things that people get stuck on is, and I think this is a part of the sexual addiction, porn addiction piece, is we're not here for your entertainment. We're here for your education. We're here for your growth.
Yeah,
and just
evolution.
because someone says they're a Tantra provider, Tantra teacher, Tantra expert, Dakini, Tantrika, priestess, doesn't mean that we're here to help you get off. We're here to evolve how you get off.
Yeah. We're here to help you explore new horizons of what it means to get off, and not just get off, but to actually get on. To get on the bandwagon of, wow, there's so much more into sexuality and there's so much more to your potential and your arousal and your ability to feel your own body. It's powerful. It's potent. It creates confidence and it creates this sense of empowerment inside of you, like that you can do anything that you put your mind to. And I think that's one of the most awesome things. I was having a conversation with a client or a potential client the other day, and they were saying, like, when I'm in that level of pleasure, I forget that I don't love my body. I forget that I should have shame.
Away.
Yes. Yeah, because that level of pleasure is so healing. Like, pleasure is medicine, people. So drink it up.
Well, and I think that's part of the porn addiction, though, is the pleasure gives them relief from the pain of not liking themselves.
Totally.
And so it's a two-way street, right? The pleasure can give you relief from like feeling insecure and not confident about your body. And then suddenly you're in a state and you're wide open and you're beautiful. especially when you're being in connection with a partner.
Yeah.
But otherwise, we can go to this place where it becomes so tempting to get out of the pain of your insecurities
Right.
that you drive yourself to these states. I mean, the French call it the little death. You know,
Right.
you get to be
The Taoists
in,
call it that too. It's
Yeah.
like in a moment of I don't
I
have
don't
to
exist.
deal with my persona
I
in
can
this
be in
moment.
bliss. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you can get
But why not
addicted
learn to
that.
stretch that out and in a healthy way where you're actually connecting to God essence?
Yeah, right. So then it's just about
That's
the
what we
frame
teach.
and the
Okay. So come on
perspective.
down.
All right. Well, so much fun.
Much love.
Thanks for tuning in. This episode was hosted by Tantric Sex Master Coach and Positive Psychology Facilitator Leah Piper, as well as by Chinese and Functional Medicine Doctor and Taoist Sexology Teacher Dr. Willow Brown. Don't forget, your comments, likes, subscribes, and suggestions matter. Let's realize this new world together.